Thank you, Moderator. Member for Kikori Open, Vice President, good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to present on behalf of the National Energy Authority at the 17th year of this conference, and also a great pleasure to be presenting under its inaugural run as Chambers of Resources and Energy, and the conference being now termed as Resources and Energy Investment Conference. I begin today by acknowledging the clans of Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, of the lands of Tamula, on the lands that we are meeting today. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. Unfortunately, I don't have any present PowerPoints, so I'm afraid I might bore you with this, but I'll move along as fast as I can. So the National Energy Authority, a newly established entity under the Marape Basel government, a reform of electricity with a view to increase the current low access to electricity. And such change was required to ensure former SOE, being PNG Power, as regulator with ICCC, to be more commercially orientated. Through this reform, the National Energy Authority is charged with the responsibility of regulating generation, transmission, distribution, and retailing of the renewable energy and non-renewable energy. National Energy Authority, 2 years since the commencement of its constituent law, being the National Energy Authority Act 2021, and establishing the authority, and 1 year since becoming fully operational. In retrospect and to date, what has the National Energy Authority achieved or worked on since its establishment with respect to activities around renewable energy and the regulatory matters affecting the powers and functions of the National Energy Authority? Amidst the backdrop of government policy for greater access to electricity is the sustainability and affordability elements that is also the component that must not be overlooked. And all too real are the facts that PNG has a total installed generation capacity in PNG being at 900 megawatts, with 40% of capacity being provided by diesel generators at very high cost due to world index commodity prices. And from the 900 megawatts of generation capacity, 400 of which is being managed by the state-owned enterprise, PNG Power Limited, supplying to the three main grids, Gazelle, Port Moresby, and Ramu. And 16 geographically isolated independent power grids that service the provincial centers, and with electrification rate of somewhere around 15 to 20%, essentially the rest of PNG in the dark. Generally poor and frequent blackouts with an average of 100 interruptions and more than 25 hours per month from Port Moresby, Ramu grids due to inadequate generation capacity to aging networks. Self-generation or backup generators are all too common. All the more reason to look at renewable energy and low carbon options, despite PNG being a low to negative emitter. I'm sure all are very much interested to know the plans that the authority has and has been undertaking with regards to the systems change or the transition from fossil fuel to the low carbon energy in the PNG context. Before I speak on that, it would be remiss of me not to mention the overwhelming and external support given to the government of PNG through the authority, in particular, to see the number of development partners very eager to assist and to run their programs in that space. Just to mention a few, the US aid, Australian aid, New Zealand aid. Excellent support as they aim to assist the government to achieve its policy objective, which is also a key economic driver of increasing the rate of electricity access, and its current rate from 70% by 2027, consistent with the MDTP4. A challenge is to coordinate and to avoid duplicity both on the government and the development partners' part, and also to ensure all development activities are consistent with our laws, policies, and international best practice with regards to technical regulations. In pursuing such work plan, the authority is working under 4 strategic key priority areas in terms of traditional institutional reforms, legislative and policy reforms, coordination and implementation of the National Electrification Rollout Plan, and the regulation of the energy industry. To deliver the government's objective of accessibility, reliability, and affordability of electricity. Under these key strategic priority areas, the authority has undertaken the following activities to drive the transition. Development of subsector policies from hydro, solar, geothermal, biofuels, hydrogen and ammonia are this year's development priorities, and the authority intends to commence consultative process and development of regulatory framework in 2024. In addition to that is also the public-private partnership considerations. These considerations and exploration of options to drive change in which the high cost environment in the provincial and sea centers will be guided by our proposed decentralization electricity supply policy. The rationale of this policy is that the centralized electricity supply within a region are for economies of scale in generation and natural monopoly. These benefits do not, of course, exist in the isolated regions when grid integration is economically unattractive. Such is the case across PNG's main grids and its sea centers. Bulk of the electrification program under this is dependent upon NEA and the development partners finalizing and advancing electrification plans and funding community service obligations related to its obligations to private developers of off-grid projects proceeding outside of the NEROP. Regulatory framework, currently the proposed amendments that will enable the appropriate regulations, particularly the off-grid regulation, has been passed on the floor of Parliament in September, and recently on Tuesday has come into operation, which will allow the authority to now proceed to enacting those regulations. The power purchase agreements, contracts and templates to make it possible for renewable energy projects to be more competitive and cost efficient. The authority intends to set up a process for transparent and open market solicitation of the PPAs. This allows offtake structures and update of technical standards to allow installation and usage of solar PV for self-consumption, creating a low carbon captive generation option. Also, the energy sector development programs that the authority is running through the Department of Treasury in terms of undertaking key discussions on financing plans to support key energy sector development programs, amongst others, addressing aging infrastructure, policy and regulatory frameworks for adequacy and efficiency of low carbon energy supply access to energy through microgrid projects, with components of community social obligations to operate as subsidies to encourage and attract investment, just to name a few. In terms of the legal framework, the renewable energy space can operate within its current provisions of the license administration prior to the regulations coming into effect in early 2024, hopefully. So essentially, if the energy source is a final product, it is for electricity generation, it will come under that, under the current National Energy Authority Act. There is also the exemption provisions has been considered by a couple of development partners. That must be made clear that that exemption is only for conditions and not in terms of the exemption from the entirety of the Act and being regulated by the authority. So the off-grid regulation, that would cover, once enacted, will deal with the capacity of 1 megawatt and lower service areas. The off-grid solutions are essential to meet government's objective, of course. Hence, the off-grid regulation for small power stations is intended to support the developers to help the electricity to all households, developers, service providers, policymakers, regulators, and the public at large in meeting rural electrification goals and expanding access to clean, sustainable, affordable, and reliable electricity in PNG. The regulation shall also apply to provisions of electrification services in service areas, the owners, operators, and users of the service areas, as well as all the private and public stakeholders such as PNG Power or any institution or agency, as the case may be, by interacting with the service areas. The off-grid regulation, however, does not cover the sale or use of individual electrification systems or single appliance systems by other entities and service providers, or the sale of or use of appliances by other entities than the service providers. In a nutshell, the off-grid regulation prescribes, amongst other things, matters relating to electrification services areas and the mandatory conditions around the licenses. So I guess the main message for the development partners and those that have been concerned is that we move things along and we've got the amendments through. It has now come into operation and we are ready to move into the off-grid regulation to enable the funding and the support to come into the off-grid small power stations projects. Thank you.